Hi guys, I am so glad you could join me here tonight. There is something deeply grounding about looking back into the past, especially when we look at how those who came before us found their way through the most challenging cycles of nature. Tonight, I want to take you on a journey back in time, to a season that tested the very limits of human endurance and spirit. We are going to explore the quiet, heavy beauty and the immense stillness of the harshest winter of the 1800s. It was a time when the world seemed to grow smaller, held in the cold grip of an unrelenting frost, and when the simple act of keeping a fire alive was a profound victory. So, I want you to settle in, find your most comfortable position, and let the weight of your blankets remind you that you are safe, warm, and protected. Close your eyes, let your breathing slow to a natural, easy rhythm, and let my voice carry you across the years to a remote mountain valley where the air is sharp with the scent of pine and the first, silent flakes of snow are just beginning to fall. The year is 1816, though in this high, rugged terrain, the specific number matters far less than the tilt of the sun and the thickening of the clouds. You are standing on the porch of a small, sturdy cabin, hand-hewn from the very timber that surrounds you. The wood of the railing is cold and slightly rough under your palm, weathered by decades of sun and rain, but today, it feels different. There is a density in the air, a pressure that hums in your ears, telling you that the long, unusual autumn is finally coming to an end. All through the summer, the warmth never truly arrived. The crops were stunted, and the mornings often brought a layer of frost that shouldn't have been there. Now, as the afternoon light fades into a bruised purple hue, the true winter is arriving with a weight you can feel in your chest. You look out over the valley, watching as the vibrant greens of the lower pines begin to disappear behind a veil of gray. The silence is absolute. It is the kind of silence that only exists in the high places, where the wind holds its breath before a great change. You can hear the rhythmic, slow creak of the trees deep in the forest, a sound like old bones settling. You take a deep breath, and the air is so crisp it almost stings the back of your throat, smelling of wood smoke and damp earth. Behind you, the heavy oak door of the cabin stands slightly ajar, casting a thin, flickering sliver of orange light onto the frosted boards of the porch. You know what lies ahead. You have spent weeks preparing, your muscles aching from the labor of stacking cord after cord of seasoned maple and oak against the leeward side of the house. You can see the woodpile now, a long, dark wall of fuel that represents your survival. Each log was split by your own hand, the rhythmic thud of the axe echoing through the valley in the weeks prior, a steady heartbeat of preparation against the coming silence. You think of the cellar beneath your feet, where the harvest, meager as it was this year, is tucked away in burlap sacks and wooden crates. The scent of stored potatoes, dried herbs, and smoked meat lingers in the cracks of the floorboards, a comforting, earthy perfume that speaks of foresight and care. The first flake of snow falls now. It doesn't drop quickly, it wanders, drifting on a microscopic current of air, spinning lazily until it lands on the back of your hand. It is perfectly formed, a delicate, crystalline star that holds its shape for a heartbeat before the heat of your skin turns it into a tiny, shimmering drop of water. Then another follows, and another, landing on the dark wood of the railing. You watch them accumulate, at first just a dusting, like powdered sugar, but quickly turning into a solid, white layer. The world begins to blur. The sharp edges of the mountain peaks soften as the snow thickens, turning the landscape into a charcoal drawing where the lines between the earth and the sky slowly dissolve. You feel a strange sense of isolation, but it isn't a lonely feeling, it is an intimate one. The valley is tucking itself in, pulling a heavy, white quilt over the meadows and the frozen streams, and you are part of this closing circle. You step back inside the cabin, the heavy door groaning on its iron hinges as you pull it shut, muffling the sound of the rising wind. The warmth of the hearth hits you like a physical embrace. The fire is a living thing here, a golden, pulsing heart in the center of the room. You watch the flames lick around a large log, the embers glowing a deep, incandescent red. The light dances across the walls, catching the texture of the stone chimney and the smooth, worn surface of the wooden table. There is no sound here but the soft hiss of sap within the wood and the occasional pop of a spark. You move to the window, a small pane of hand-blown glass that is slightly wavy, distorting the world outside. Already, the frost is beginning to bloom in the corners of the glass, intricate patterns of ice that look like the fronds of a ghostly fern. You trace the edge of the wood frame, feeling the draft-proofing you tucked into the crevices, strips of wool and dried moss, working to keep the biting cold at bay. You sit down in the heavy chair by the fire, the wool of your sweater thick and comforting against your skin. This is the beginning of the long wait. In the 1800s, winter was not a season you simply moved through, it was a season you inhabited. There were no distractions, no voices from the outside world, only the books you had saved for these months, the mending of clothes, and the steady, slow work of existing. You feel the rhythm of your own heart slowing down to match the pace of the cabin. Outside, the wind begins to pick up, a low, mournful whistle as it whips around the corners of the eaves, but inside, you are encased in a cocoon of light and heat. You think of your neighbors, miles away across the ridges, each in their own small pocket of warmth, doing exactly what you are doing, tending the fire, checking the latch on the door, and listening to the snow pile up against the walls. The darkness outside is now total, a deep, velvety black that makes the white of the falling snow seem to glow with its own internal light. You can no longer see the trees or the path that leads down to the creek. The world has been erased, replaced by a swirling, white void. It is a humbling thought, realizing how small the human footprint is against the vastness of a mountain winter. But there is a profound peace in this surrender to the elements. You don't need to go anywhere. You don't need to do anything but be present in this moment, in this circle of warmth. You reach for a heavy wool blanket, draping it over your lap, feeling its weight and the coarse, honest texture of the fibers. The firelight casts long, swaying shadows that stretch across the floor and climb the rafters, creating a sense of movement in the still room. As you watch the embers, your mind wanders to the ancestors who sat by similar fires, facing the same uncertainty of a long, dark season. There is a shared history in this struggle, a quiet lineage of endurance that flows through your veins. You are part of a long line of people who knew how to find beauty in the bleakness, who understood that the winter was a time for reflection and for the gathering of inner strength. The wind howls a bit louder now, rattling the shutters, but it only makes the interior feel more secure, more sacred. You find yourself noticing the small details you usually overlook, the way the light reflects off a tin mug, the specific grain of the wood and the floorboards, the steady, rhythmic sound of your own breathing. The air in the cabin is dry and smells of toasted grain and cedar. You realize that the snow is likely already several inches deep, banking up against the foundation of the house, providing a natural layer of insulation. The cabin is being buried, held fast by the mountain, becoming a part of the landscape itself. You feel a deep sense of gratitude for the roof over your head and the wood in the pile. Every small comfort, the warmth of the tea in your hand, the softness of the rug beneath your feet, is magnified by the knowledge of the frozen wilderness just inches away on the other side of the logs. You lean your head back, closing your eyes, and listen to the symphony of the storm. It is a complex sound, a mixture of the high-pitched hiss of fine snow hitting the roof and the deep, percussive thud of the wind hitting the solid walls. It is a lullaby of the wild, a reminder that the earth is alive and powerful, even in its most frozen state. The fire begins to settle, the bright yellow flames giving way to a steady, rhythmic orange glow. You know you will need to add another log soon, to keep the heart of the home beating through the night, but for now, you simply sit in the fading light. The world outside is growing colder, the temperature dropping as the storm intensifies, but here, in the center of your world, there is only stillness. You feel the boundaries of your awareness shrinking until they encompass only this room, this chair, and the fading heat of the hearth. The weight of the day's labor begins to pull at your limbs, a gentle, insistent tiredness that feels earned and honest. You are ready for the long night ahead, and for the many nights that will follow as the great winter of the century truly begins to settle its icy hand over the land. The embers shift, a small cascade of sparks rising into the chimney like tiny stars, and you watch them until they vanish into the dark, leaving you in the soft, protective hush of the mountain night. The fire has settled into a deep, pulsing bed of rubies now, and the silence inside the cabin has grown even thicker, weighted by the heavy accumulation of snow pressing against the exterior walls. You rise slowly from your chair, your joints feeling the slight stiffness that comes with the drop in pressure, and you move toward the wood box near the hearth. The floorboards are ice-cold beneath your feet where the rug doesn't reach, a sharp reminder of the world beyond the timber. You reach down and lift a heavy split of oak, its bark rough and frozen, and as you place it onto the embers, a small cloud of white steam rises where the frost on the wood meets the heat. You watch as the flames tentatively lick the new fuel, curling around the edges before finding a hold and blooming into a soft, golden flicker. This is the constant dialogue of your life now, the exchange between the wood you gathered and the heat you need to stay alive. You stand there for a moment, letting the warmth soak into your shins, watching the way the light reflects off the dried bundles of sage and thyme hanging from the rafters. Their scent is faint now, a ghostly memory of a summer that never quite arrived, but it offers a tether to the idea of growth and sun. As the days bleed into weeks, the world outside transforms into a landscape of monochromatic stillness. When you finally open the door the next morning, you have to lean your shoulder against it, pushing back a drift that has piled halfway up the frame. The air that rushes in is no longer just cold, it is predatory. It lunges at your lungs, turning your breath into a thick, swirling fog that vanishes almost instantly in the dry air. You step out into a world that has been completely reshaped. The familiar path to the well is gone, buried under 3 feet of crystalline powder that crunches and squeaks with a high-pitched protest under your boots. The trees, once vibrant and reaching, are now bowed low, their branches encased in thick sleeves of ice that catch the pale, watery light of a sun that offers no warmth. You move with deliberate slowness. In this kind of cold, every movement must be calculated to preserve the heat within your core. You feel the wool of your scarf against your face, becoming damp with your breath and then stiffening as the moisture freezes into tiny beads of ice. The forest, which used to be filled with the chatter of birds and the scurrying of small creatures, is now a cathedral of ice. The silence is so profound it feels heavy, like a physical weight pressing against your eardrums. Occasionally, the stillness is shattered by a sound like a gunshot, the terrifying crack of a tree limb snapping under the weight of the ice or the heart of a maple freezing through until the wood itself ruptures. You walk toward the shed where the remaining livestock are huddled, your hands tucked deep into your pockets, fingers curled into tight fists. Inside the small structure, the air is slightly warmer, thick with the smell of dry hay and the sweet, musky breath of the animals. You can see their ribs just a little more clearly now, a sight that brings a quiet ache to your chest. You ration the hay carefully, shaking out the golden stalks and watching as they bury their noses into it with a desperate focus. You run a hand over the coarse hair of a cow's flank, feeling the heat radiating from her body, a small miracle of biology in a frozen world. You are all in this together, a small island of warm-blooded life in an ocean of frost. Returning to the cabin, you begin the daily ritual of melting snow for water. You fill the large iron pot, the metal so cold it sticks to your skin if you aren't careful, and set it over the fire. You watch as the snow collapses in on itself, turning from a fluffy white mass into a clear, steaming liquid. It is a slow process, one that requires patience and a constant eye on the woodpile. You realize that your movements have become more economical, more rhythmic. You no longer rush. To rush is to sweat, and to sweat is to invite the cold to take a deeper hold. You spend hours sitting by the window, carving small pieces of wood or mending a tear in a heavy coat. The needle feels clumsy in your chilled fingers, the thread a fine line of shadow against the pale fabric. Your hands are rougher now, the skin dry and cracked at the knuckles, but they are strong, accustomed to the tactile reality of survival. Rationing has become the silent theme of your afternoons. You move to the cellar door, lifting the heavy ring and descending into the cool, dark space beneath the floor. The store of potatoes is lower than you'd like it to be, the tubers firm but few. You select only two, their skins dusty with the earth they grew in. You find a small piece of salted pork, its surface white with preserved crystals, and a handful of dried beans. As you carry these ingredients back up to the light, you weigh them in your hands, acutely aware of the math of the winter. Every meal is a withdrawal from a bank that isn't taking deposits until the spring. You set the pot to simmer, the scent of the salt and the earth slowly filling the small room, competing with the smell of the wood smoke. It is a humble meal, but as you sit in the deepening twilight, the warmth of the bowl against your palms feels like a luxury beyond description. You eat slowly, savoring the texture of each bite, letting the heat spread through your chest and down into your tired limbs. The shadows in the corners of the room seem to grow longer and more fluid as the sun dips below the jagged horizon. The year without a summer has bled into a winter that feels eternal, a season where time itself seems to have frozen. You find yourself listening to the house, the way the logs groan as they contract in the plummeting temperature, the way the wind finds the tiniest gaps in the chinking and makes them sing. You take a bit of tallow and rub it into the leather of your boots, the oil softening the hide and making it water-resistant for the next day's trek to the woodpile. It is a meditative task, the circular motion of your hands providing a focal point for your wandering thoughts. You think about how much of your life is now centered on the most basic elements: earth, wood, water, and fire. The complexities of the outside world, the politics and the news of the 19th century, have faded into insignificance. All that matters is the integrity of these four walls and the height of the flame in the hearth. As the evening settles in, you pull a heavy chair closer to the fire, the light flickering across the pages of a well-worn book, though you find you are often looking past the words and into the glowing heart of the coals. The cold is a living presence now, a ghost that sits at your shoulder, reminding you of its power. You feel it in the draft that schemes across the floor, in the way the air turns brittle when the fire dips. You reach for your heavy wool socks, pulling them on over the ones you are already wearing, the layers of fiber trapping the heat against your skin. There is a strange, quiet beauty in this level of focus. Your world has become a series of small, meaningful actions. The way you bank the fire for the night, covering the glowing embers with a layer of ash to preserve them until morning, is a gesture of hope. You are tending to the future, ensuring that when you wake in the dark, frozen hours of the early dawn, the spark of life will still be there, waiting to be coaxed back into a flame. You lie down in your bed, the mattress stuffed with dried corn husks that rustle with every movement. You pull the heavy quilts up to your chin, layer upon layer of hand-stitched history, until you can feel the comforting weight of them pressing you down into the bed. The air in the room is so cold now that your nose feels numb, but beneath the blankets, you are a sanctuary of warmth. You listen to the storm outside, which has returned with a new, sharper intensity. The snow is hitting the windowpanes like sand, a dry, scouring sound that speaks of the sub-zero temperatures. You are safe. You are tucked away in the heart of the mountain, a small, breathing spark in a vast, white wilderness. The isolation, once daunting, now feels like a shield. You let your eyes close, the orange glow of the dying fire still burning on the back of your eyelids, and you let the rhythmic, howling song of the wind lull you into a deep, heavy sleep, knowing that tomorrow will bring the same challenges, and that you have the quiet strength to meet them, one slow breath at a time. The house creaks once more, settling into the ice, as the moon rises over a world that has forgotten the color green. The morning light that filters through the frost-thickened window is not the bright gold of a rising sun, but a dim, diffused gray that seems to emanate from the snow itself. As you stir beneath the heavy layers of quilts, you notice that the air inside the cabin has reached a new level of crystalline stillness. Your breath hangs in the air for a long time, a slow-moving cloud that catches the pale light before dissolving into the shadows of the rafters. The silence this morning is different than it was yesterday. It is a suffocating silence, the kind that only comes when the snow has climbed so high against the walls that it begins to muffle the very sounds of the world outside. You can no longer hear the wind whistling through the eaves. Instead, there is only a low, rhythmic thrumming, the vibration of the earth itself under the weight of the deepening drifts. You reach out a hand from the warmth of the blankets to find your clothes, and the fabric feels stiff, almost brittle, from the overnight chill. Every movement is slow and deliberate as you dress, pulling on wool over wool, building a fortress of fiber around your body before you even attempt to leave the bed. When your feet finally find the floor, the wood is so cold it feels like stepping onto a frozen lake, the chill shooting up through your soles and grounding you instantly in the reality of this midwinter morning. You move to the hearth, finding the small mound of ash you carefully built the night before. With a small iron poker, you peel back the gray crust to reveal the glowing orange heart still beating underneath. It is a relief, a small surge of gratitude that the spark held, and as you feed it small slivers of kindling, you listen to the first cheerful crackle of the wood catching, a sound that feels like a conversation in an otherwise silent world. By midday, the gray light has not brightened, but rather deepened into a heavy, leaden hue. You realize that another storm has moved in, not with the dramatic fury of a gale, but with a relentless, steady falling of flakes so large and heavy they seem to pull the sky down toward the ground. You decide you must check the path to the woodpile one more time before the visibility vanishes entirely. When you push against the door, the resistance is immense. You have to use your full weight, carving a narrow arc into the snow just to step outside. The world you step into is unrecognizable. The landmarks you have lived by for years, the old stump, the low stone wall, the fence line, have all been swallowed by a sea of white. There is no horizon, the ground and the sky have merged into a single, dizzying haze of falling white. As you move toward the woodpile, only 20 paces away, you feel a sudden, sharp pang of vulnerability. The wind has picked up, and within seconds, your tracks behind you are being filled in, erased by the drifting powder. If you were to turn around 3 times, you might lose the cabin entirely in this whiteout, even though it stands just a few yards away. You realize then that travel has become more than just difficult, it has become a gamble. The mountain has reclaimed its territory, and you are a guest whose movements are now strictly governed by the whims of the ice. You grab as many logs as you can carry, the rough bark catching on your mittens, and you navigate back to the door by the faint, orange glow of the fire reflecting in the windowpane. It is the only lighthouse you have in this frozen sea. Back inside, the weight of the isolation begins to settle over you, not as a sharp fear, but as a slow, quiet realization. You are completely alone in this high valley. The neighbors you could once see from the ridge are now effectively in another world. The roads are gone, buried under drifts that are likely 10 or 12 feet deep in the hollows. There will be no mail, no passing travelers, no sound of a distant bell. It is just you, the fire, and the ticking of the clock on the mantel, which seems to have slowed its pace to match the frozen world. You spend the afternoon at the table, the wood cool beneath your arms, as you slowly sharpen a small knife against a whetstone. The rhythmic, grinding sound is hypnotic. SHHT, 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 a steady pulse that fills the room. You find yourself thinking about the nature of time when it is stripped of its usual markers. Without the bustle of the seasons or the demands of the farm, time becomes a fluid thing, measured only by the consumption of logs and the gradual emptying of the flour barrel. You look at your hands, and you see the history of the winter written in the dry skin and the steady way they hold the blade. There is a strange, melancholy peace in this. You are being refined by the cold, stripped down to the essentials of thought and action. You find your mind wandering to memories of warmth, the smell of sun-drenched hay, the sound of bees in the clover, the feeling of sweat on your brow during the harvest, but these memories feel thin and translucent, like old parchment. The only reality is the frost blooming on the glass and the heat of the fire on your face. As evening approaches, the storm outside intensifies, and the cabin begins to groan under the pressure. The logs, heavy and thick, shift slightly, letting out long, low moans as the cold reaches deep into their hearts. You decide to prepare a simple soup, the last of the shriveled carrots and a handful of dried peas. The steam from the pot rises to the ceiling, creating a small patch of dampness that smells of the earth. You eat in the dark, save for the firelight, watching the way the shadows of the furniture stretch and contract on the walls like large, slow-moving animals. The emotional weight of the winter is heavy now. It is a physical sensation, a pressure in the chest that comes from the constant vigilance required to stay warm. You find yourself listening for a sound that isn't the wind, a voice, a footstep, a bird, but the silence of the snow is absolute. It is a blanket that smothers all life, holding the world in a state of suspended animation. You realize that you are participating in a grand, quiet endurance, a test of spirit that requires no audience. You are simply existing, a small flame of consciousness in the vast, unblinking eye of the storm. The wind suddenly hits the side of the house with a force that makes the floorboards vibrate, and for a moment, you feel the fragility of your shelter. But then the logs hold, the stone chimney stands firm, and the moment passes. You are safe, but you are changed. The night deepens, and you find yourself reluctant to go to bed, as if staying awake by the fire is the only thing keeping the winter at bay. You watch the frost on the window grow, the intricate patterns now covering the entire pane, blocking out the darkness. Each crystal is a masterpiece of geometry, a cold flower blooming in the dark. You trace one with your finger, the ice biting into your skin, and you feel a strange sense of kinship with the cold. It is not an enemy to be hated, but a force to be respected, a great, ancient power that has returned to remind the world of its origins. You pull your chair even closer to the hearth, the heat almost scorching your knees, and you let your head rest against the high back of the seat. The flickering light plays across your closed eyelids, and you listen to the snow piling up against the door, inch by inch, foot by foot. You are being tucked in by the mountain, hidden away in a secret place where the 1800s feel like a distant dream and only the breath in your lungs is real. The world is gone, and there is only this room, this fire, and the slow, steady rhythm of a heart that refuses to give in to the frost. You find yourself drifting into a state between waking and sleep, where the sound of the wind becomes a low, humming song, a lullaby of the high places that tells you to rest, to wait, and to believe in the eventual return of the sun, even as the ice grows thick and the stars are hidden behind a veil of endless white. In this half-light, the shadows seem to dance a little slower, and the scent of the wood smoke wraps around you like a heavy cloak, shielding you from the infinite, freezing dark that lies just beyond the timber walls. The fire has burned down to a steady, rhythmic pulse of amber, casting a soft, low light that barely reaches the corners of the room. You sit in the profound stillness of the middle night, listening to the cabin breathe. It is a slow, heavy respiration, the sound of ancient timber settling under the immense weight of the snow that now cloaks the roof like a thick, white fleece. The world outside has ceased to be a place of movement and has become a place of pure, unmoving sculpture. There is no longer any distinction between the road, the garden, and the creek. They have all been smoothed over by the relentless falling of the flakes, creating a landscape that is both beautiful and alien. You reach out to adjust the heavy wool blanket around your shoulders, the fabric rustling softly in the quiet. The air in the room is layered, warm and dry near the hearth, but turning sharp and thin as it nears the frost-caked windows. You realize that your life has narrowed to the diameter of this warmth, a small, circular existence that revolves around the tending of the flame and the preservation of the body. There is a strange, quiet dignity in this simplicity. The anxieties of the wider world, the news of distant cities and the politics of the young century, have all been muffled by the drifts. They feel like rumors from another life, a life lived in a world where the sun was hot and the earth was soft beneath your feet. Morning arrives not with a burst of light, but with a gradual thinning of the darkness into a soft, milky gray. You rise from your chair, your movements fluid and slow, and begin the first task of the day. You move to the door and find that the snow has pressed so firmly against the wood that the latch is cold enough to burn your skin. You wrap your hand in a cloth before lifting it, the metal clicking with a hollow, frozen sound. When you push the door open just a few inches, you are met with a solid wall of white. The snow has climbed above the lintel, sealing you into your wooden sanctuary. You take a small shovel, kept inside for just this purpose, and begin to carve a tunnel upward toward the surface. The snow is cold and dry, falling away in neat, crystalline blocks that reveal the deep, ethereal blue of the light filtered through the drifts. As you work, you hear the muffled sound of your own breathing, loud and steady in the cramped space. There is no wind here, only the incredible, crushing silence of the mountain. When you finally break through to the surface, the air that hits you is so pure it feels like drinking from a cold spring. The sky is a pale, cloudless expanse, and the sun is a white disk that provides light but no heat. You stand on top of the drifts, looking down at the chimney of your own home, the blue smoke rising in a straight, unwavering line into the still air. Your movements through the day are governed by the economy of survival. You walk across the crust of the snow, which has frozen hard enough to support your weight, to the shed where the wood is stored. Every step is a deliberate act, the crunch of the frozen surface echoing across the silent valley. You find yourself moving with a certain grace, a rhythm born of necessity. There is no room for haste in this environment. To rush is to waste the precious energy your body has stored from your meager meals. You spend a long time at the woodpile, selecting each log with care. You look for the heavy, dense pieces of hickory and oak that will burn slow and long through the coming night. As you carry them back to the tunnel, the cold begins to seep through your gloves, a dull, aching sensation that reminds you of the stakes of your presence here. You stop for a moment, resting your chin on the top of the woodpile, and look out toward the forest. The trees are draped in so much snow they look like hooded figures frozen in prayer, their branches bowed so low they touch the ground. There is no movement, no sign of the deer or the foxes that usually haunt these woods. They, too, are tucked away in the hollows of the earth, waiting for the turning of the wheel. Inside the cabin, the ritual of the afternoon begins. You set a small pot of water on the crane over the fire, adding a handful of dried herbs that you gathered back when the world was green. The steam rises, carrying the scent of summer into the room, mint, chamomile, and a hint of wild rose. It is a small sensory rebellion against the monochrome world outside. You sit at the table and take up a piece of cedar, a small carving knife in your hand. You are not making anything in particular, just whittling the wood down, letting the shavings fall into a basket to be used as kindling. The sound of the blade slicing through the soft grain is a gentle, repetitive melody. You find your thoughts drifting, turning inward. In the 1800s, this kind of isolation was the great teacher. It taught you the shape of your own mind, the texture of your own memories. You think of the people who lived in this valley before you, and those who will live here long after you are gone. You are part of a long, silent chain of endurance, a lineage of souls who knew how to sit still and wait for the light to return. The shadows of the rafters move slowly across the floor as the sun makes its short arc across the sky, marking the passage of time more accurately than any clock. As the pale sun begins to dip below the ridge, the cold intensifies, turning the air into a brittle substance that seems as though it might shatter if struck. You move to the window and watch the sky turn a deep, bruised indigo, while the snow on the ground takes on a ghostly, luminous glow. The stars begin to appear, one by one, appearing closer and brighter than you have ever seen them, like diamonds set in a floor of black velvet. You bank the fire, piling the coals together and covering them with a thin layer of ash to keep the heat from escaping up the chimney too quickly. You feel a deep, settling calm. The landscape is frozen, the world is silent, and you are here, a small and steady flame of life in the heart of the great winter. You wrap yourself in your quilts, feeling the heavy, comforting weight of the fabric, and listen to the house hum its low, frozen tune. The fire has retreated into a low, smoldering glow, a deep crimson eye watching from the back of the hearth as the middle of the winter begins to exert its most silent and heavy pressure. You wake before the light, the air in the cabin having sharpened into a thin, brittle cold that catches in your nostrils and makes the simple act of drawing a breath feel like a deliberate task. You reach out from the sanctuary of your quilts, your hand meeting the frigid air with a momentary shock, and you search for the tinder box by the bedside. Every movement is slower now, not because of age, but because the cold has a way of thickening time, making the transition from rest to action feel like wading through deep water. You move to the fireplace, the floorboards emitting a sharp, frozen protest under your weight, and you begin the morning's first and most vital labor. You scrape away the gray ash to find the embers, those tiny, surviving sparks that have lived through the night, and you feed them the last of the fine cedar shavings you carved yesterday. There is a profound, quiet relief when the first blue flame licks upward, a small victory against the vast, encroaching frost that has turned the world outside into a monument of ice. As the sun struggles to rise over the jagged eastern ridge, casting a flat, pewter light across the buried landscape, you turn your attention to the pantry. The once full shelves are showing the skeletons of their own structure now, the gaps between the jars of preserved berries and the sacks of grain growing wider with each passing week. You reach for a small bag of oats, feeling the weight of it in your palm, a weight you have come to know with an intimate, almost rhythmic accuracy. You measure out a portion, the grain clicking softly against the wooden bowl, and you realize that your appetite has changed. It has become a steady, low-pitched hum rather than a sharp demand, a quiet understanding that you must fuel the body just enough to maintain the heat, but not so much as to deplete the store before the first thaw. You add a bit of water melted from the snow outside, the steam rising in a thick, fragrant cloud that smells of toasted earth and wood smoke. You eat by the hearth, the warmth of the bowl seeping into your fingers, and you find yourself staring into the flames, lost in a state of calm, meditative endurance. The fatigue is there, a soft shadow at the edge of your vision, but it is not a heavy burden. It is simply a part of the season, a natural slowing of the spirit to match the dormant world. The woodpile, too, has begun to show the signs of the long wait. When you venture out through your shoveled tunnel into the blinding white of the morning, you see the stack has diminished, the wall of fuel you built in the autumn now sitting lower than the eaves of the shed. You select the logs with a new level of discernment, choosing the knotty pieces of maple that will burn with a stubborn, slow intensity, saving the quick-burning pine for the moments when you need a sudden burst of light. The physical effort of carrying the wood feels greater than it did a month ago, your muscles lean and efficient but lacking the surplus energy of the harvest time. You stop halfway to the door, the cold air crystalline and still, and you listen. There is no sound but the high, thin ringing of the frost in your ears. The isolation is total now, a soft blanket that has muffled the very idea of a world beyond these mountains. You look at the tracks you have made, a deep, singular path between the house and the wood, and you realize how much of your life is contained within these few yards of frozen earth. It is a peaceful realization, a sense of belonging to the landscape in its most demanding hour. Back inside, the afternoon is spent in a series of small, necessary routines that provide a structure to the silence. You take up the heavy iron needle and a length of waxed thread to reinforce the seams of your winter coat, the leather stiff and resistant in your hands. The light is dim, filtered through the thick patterns of frost on the glass that have grown into miniature forests of ice, blocking out all but the most basic shapes of the trees outside. You move your chair closer to the window to catch the last of the gray light, your fingers working with a slow, practiced precision. There is a deep satisfaction in the repair, in the act of making something last just a little bit longer. You find yourself thinking of the texture of things, the coarseness of the wool, the smoothness of the hearthstones, the dry heat of the fire. These sensory details have become your companions, replacing the voices and the activity of the warmer months. You are learning the language of the house, the way it sighs as the temperature drops, the way the wind hums a different note when it passes over the chimney. As the twilight begins to pool in the corners of the room, turning the white world outside into a deep, ethereal violet, you prepare for the night with a sense of quiet reverence. You bank the fire with a large, heavy log, one that will hold the heat in its core until the dawn, and you pull the heavy rug closer to the hearth to block the drafts that sneak through the floorboards. The hunger in your stomach is a quiet companion, one you acknowledge with a small piece of dried fruit, the sweetness of it exploding on your tongue like a memory of the sun. You feel a profound connection to the rhythm of the earth, a sense that you are participating in a grand, slow breathing that began long before you and will continue long after. The weight of the winter is no longer something you endure, it is something you inhabit, a space of deep reflection and steady, unhurried life. You climb back into the layers of your bed, the corn husks rustling softly as you settle in, and you watch the last of the orange light dance upon the ceiling. The world is frozen, the stores are thinning, and the silence is absolute, but you are warm, you are present, and you are ready for the long, starlit hours of the mountain night to unfold in their own time. The middle of the night arrives with a clarity so piercing it seems to vibrate through the very logs of the cabin walls. You wake not to a sound, but to the absence of warmth, a subtle shifting of the air that tells you the temperature outside has plummeted to a new, breathtaking depth. Beneath the heavy weight of your quilts, you remain perfectly still, watching the ghost of your own breath rise in the dim silver light of the moon. The frost on the window panes has grown so thick it has begun to form heavy, jagged ridges of ice that glitter like crushed diamonds, catching the stray flickers of the dying hearth. You feel the immense, frozen weight of the mountain pressing down upon the roof, a silence so profound it feels as though the entire world has held its breath, waiting for a spring that feels like a myth from a distant land. You reach out a hand, feeling the air move against your skin like a blade of ice, and you pull the wool closer to your chin, tucking the edges beneath your shoulders to seal in the last remnants of your body's heat. The silence is no longer just a lack of noise, it has become a physical presence, a cold, heavy velvet that drapes itself over every chair, every floorboard, and every shadow in the room. Eventually, the deep, rhythmic groan of the timber calls you from your bed. The cabin is shrinking in the cold, the wood contracting with sharp, sudden cracks that echo like distant pistol shots in the stillness. You move toward the hearth, your feet finding the braided rug as a small island of reprieve from the biting floor. The embers are a dull, sunset orange, buried deep beneath a protective layer of white ash. You kneel before them, your shadow stretching long and thin against the rough-hewn walls, and you begin the slow, hypnotic process of coaxing the fire back to life. You use a small hand bellows, the rhythmic whoosh hiss of the air being the only heartbeat in the room. A single spark catches a shaving of birch bark, curling it into a glowing ribbon before a tiny, pale flame leaps upward. You feed it small, dry twigs, watching as the light grows and begins to lick the edges of the larger logs. The warmth is a slow arrival, spreading first to your fingertips and then to your face, a gentle reminder that you are still the master of this small, flickering kingdom. You sit on the hearthstone, the heat of the masonry beginning to seep into your bones, and you listen to the wind. The wind has changed its tune. It is no longer a chaotic whistling, it has become a steady, low-frequency hum, a tectonic vibration that seems to come from the sky itself. It carries the sound of the frozen forest, the high, crystalline tinkling of ice-covered branches knocking against one another, a sound like 1,000 glass chandeliers shattering in slow motion. Occasionally, from far across the valley, you hear a sound you cannot quite identify, a low, booming thud as a massive shelf of snow slumps from a high ledge, or perhaps the ice on the deep lake finally buckling under its own immense pressure. These sounds do not startle you, they are merely the punctuation marks in a long, cold sentence. You find yourself becoming more attuned to the nuances of the dark. You can tell by the way the air moves near the door exactly how deep the drift has grown outside. You can tell by the scent of the smoke whether the air is heavy with moisture or brittle with a dry, Arctic frost. Your world has become a sensory map, drawn in shades of charcoal and silver, felt through the thickness of wool and the texture of stone. As the pre-dawn hours stretch out, long and languid, you find that sleep is no longer a heavy descent but a fragile, drifting state. You float on the edge of consciousness, your mind wandering through the quiet corridors of your own history. You remember the heat of a July afternoon, the way the dust danced in the light of the barn, but the memory feels thin, like an old photograph fading in the sun. The only reality is the present, the weight of the blankets, the smell of the pine pitch, and the steady, reassuring glow of the fire. You get up to fetch a drink of water, only to find that the surface of the bucket has frozen into a solid, clear disk of ice overnight. You have to break it with the back of a heavy spoon, the shards tinkling against the metal like bells. The water is so cold it makes your teeth ache, but it wakes your senses, grounding you in the physical necessity of the moment. You realize that your movements have become even more deliberate, a slow-motion dance of survival where every gesture is weighted with intention. You return to your chair, pulling a heavy shawl around your waist, and watch the frost on the window begin to change color as the first hint of light touches the eastern horizon. It is not pink or gold, but a cold, pale lavender that slowly bleeds into the gray. The nights feel longer now, as if the darkness is reluctant to leave the valley, clinging to the hollows and the shadows of the pines. You feel a subtle, underlying fatigue, a weariness of the spirit that comes from weeks of vigilance, but it is tempered by a profound sense of peace. You are enduring. You are a part of the mountain's own long winter sleep, a quiet witness to the harshest cycle of the earth. The wind dies down for a moment, leaving a vacuum of silence that is almost startling. In that gap, you hear the house settle, a soft, wooden sigh that seems to mirror your own. You lean your head back, watching the patterns of the firelight dance across the underside of the loft, and you wait for the day to announce itself through the thick, white veil of the snow. The light grows just a fraction brighter, revealing the silhouette of the trees through the ice-crusted glass, standing like silent sentinels in the freezing mist. You are here, tucked away in the heart of the 1800s, living a life measured by the inching of the frost and the steady, quiet pulse of the embers. The pale lavender of the dawn slowly transitions into a flat, chalky white, but the change is so subtle that you hardly notice when the night ends and the day begins. This is the heart of the great stillness, a time when the calendar has lost its meaning and the days have begun to bleed into one another like ink on a damp parchment. You find yourself standing by the hearth, the wooden ladle in your hand, momentarily forgetting if you have already stirred the porridge or if you are only just beginning. It is not a forgetfulness born of confusion, but of a profound, meditative immersion in the present. In the 1800s, during a winter this deep, time is not a line stretching toward a destination, it is a circle, a slow and steady rotation around the heat of the fire. You move to the small table, the surface worn smooth by decades of use, and you trace the grain of the wood with your thumb. Every knot and swirl in the timber has become a familiar landscape, a map of a world that is currently no larger than these four walls. You realize that you have stopped counting the weeks since you last saw another human face or heard a voice that wasn't the wind. The isolation has become a physical garment, a heavy, wool-lined cloak that you wear with a quiet, uncomplaining grace. You spend a long portion of the morning simply watching the frost. It has grown so thick on the glass that it has its own topography, ridges and valleys of ice that catch the dim light and refract it into 1,000 tiny, cold stars. You take a small coin from the mantle, heating it slightly by the fire, and press it against the pane. The ice hisses and relents, clearing a tiny, circular porthole through which you can glimpse the world outside. It is a world of pure, unadulterated white. The drifts have climbed so high that the fence is gone, the well is gone, and the apple trees are merely strange, crystalline ghosts reaching out of the snow. You watch a single, hardy chickadee land on a buried branch, its tiny chest puffed out against the cold. It is a spark of life in a frozen void, and you watch it until it flits away, leaving only a microscopic disturbance in the powder. This small event is the highlight of your hour, a momentary connection to the pulse of the living earth that sustains you through the long, repetitive stretches of the afternoon. You return the coin to the mantle and watch as the frost slowly, inevitably, begins to reclaim the small circle of clarity you created. The routines of survival have become your liturgy. You move from the wood box to the hearth, from the water bucket to the kettle, with a slow-motion precision that requires no conscious thought. You find yourself performing small tasks with an intensity of focus that borders on the sacred. When you grind the last of the parched corn, the rhythmic crunch slide of the stones becomes a hypnotic song, a steady beat that anchors you to the floorboards. You notice the way the light changes as the sun moves behind the heavy clouds, the shift from a cold silver to a deep, bruised charcoal. You have learned to read the temperature by the way the wood smoke curls in the chimney and the specific pitch of the floor's creak. The fatigue you felt before has settled into a deep, quiet endurance, a tempering of the spirit that allows you to exist in the silence without restlessness. You are no longer waiting for the winter to end, you are simply living within it, a part of its vast, frozen architecture. The weight of the silence is no longer a burden, but a comfort, a shield that keeps the rest of the world at bay while you tend to the small, flickering flame of your own existence. By mid-afternoon, the light begins to fail again, as if the sun is too tired to maintain its vigil. You take up a piece of mending, a heavy wool sock with a thinning heel, and you weave the needle in and out of the fibers. The repetition is soothing, a physical manifestation of the way your life is being woven into the fabric of the mountain. You think about the stories you heard as a child, of winters that lasted until May, and for the first time, those stories feel like lived reality rather than folklore. You are a character in a history that hasn't been written yet, a quiet observer of a season that will be talked about for generations. But here, in the dimming light of your cabin, there is no drama. There is only the soft hiss of the sap in a fresh log and the occasional rustle of the dry husks in your mattress. You feel a strange sense of kinship with the ancestors who sat in this very spot, watching the same shadows stretch across the same floor. The continuity of human spirit, the simple, stubborn refusal to let the fire go out, is a powerful thing. It is a quiet, unspoken victory that you celebrate every time you add another stick of wood to the coals. As the evening shadows pool in the corners, turning the room into a sanctuary of amber and ink, you prepare your final meal of the day. It is a simple bowl of broth, flavored with the last of the dried onions, but it tastes of the earth and the sun. You eat slowly, savorable every drop, listening to the cabin settle as the cold outside deepens even further. The nights have become vast, shimmering oceans of time that you navigate with the stars and the embers. You lie down in the darkness, the heavy quilts pressing you into the bed, and you listen to the silence. It is not an empty silence, it is full of the memory of the wind and the anticipation of the frost. You feel the slow, steady rhythm of your own heart, a small, warm clock ticking away in the heart of the 19th century. The world is asleep, the mountains are frozen, and you are tucked away in the center of it all, a quiet witness to the enduring peace of the great winter. You let the darkness fold around you like a soft blanket, your mind drifting through the silver-blue landscapes of sleep, knowing that tomorrow will bring the same gray light, the same cold air, and the same steady, unwavering fire. The night has been long and remarkably still, but as you wake in the pre-dawn hours of this midwinter morning, you sense a subtle shift in the atmosphere that you cannot immediately name. It is not a warmth, for the air in the cabin still carries the sharp, biting edge of a frozen world, and the water in the basin is still topped with a brittle glaze of ice that cracks like a thin pane of glass when you touch it. Yet, as you move to the hearth to wake the embers, the light that filters through the frost-heavy windows seems to possess a different quality. It is no longer that flat, leaden gray that has dominated the last few weeks. Instead, there is a faint, pearlescent glow to the air, a soft luminosity that suggests the sun is climbing just a fraction higher than it did yesterday. You stand by the fireplace, the warmth beginning to radiate against your palms, and you listen. The silence is still profound, but it has lost its crushing, heavy density. There is a lightness to it now, a transparency that makes the creak of the floorboard sound less like a protest and more like a quiet conversation. You find yourself moving with a bit more fluidity, the stiffness in your joints yielding to a slow, rhythmic energy that feels like the first, cautious stirring of a long-dormant seed. When you finally push open the heavy oak door to check the woodpile, the resistance of the snow is different. It is no longer the light, dry powder that swirls away like dust. It has become dense and settled, the surface having developed a firm, crystalline crust that sparkles with a cold, blue fire in the morning light. As you step out onto the drifts, the sound of your boots is no longer a soft thud but a sharp, rhythmic crunch that echoes across the valley. The sky is a startling, deep sapphire, a color so intense it makes your eyes ache after weeks of monochrome clouds. You look toward the forest and notice that the trees have shed some of their heavy white burdens. The branches of the hemlocks, once bowed to the breaking point, have begun to spring upward, their dark green needles peeking through the thinning ice like a promise kept in secret. The wind, which has spent months howling and scouring the landscape, is now a mere whisper, a soft breath that carries the faint, clean scent of high-altitude ice and distant pine. It doesn't bite at your skin with the same predatory hunger, it merely brushes past you, a cool reminder of the season's lingering power. You spend a long time standing on top of the drift, looking out over the valley. The light is changing by the minute, casting long, elegant shadows that stretch across the white expanse like blue ribbons. You notice the way the sun catches the edge of the creek, which is still buried deep beneath the ice, but you imagine you can hear, or perhaps just feel, the weight of the water moving slowly beneath the frozen surface. It is a subtle, subterranean vibration, a reminder that life is still there, tucked away in the dark, waiting for its moment. Your daily routines, once a repetitive cycle of survival, now feel imbued with a sense of quiet observation. As you gather the logs for the afternoon fire, you find yourself pausing to examine the texture of the bark, noting the way the sunlight warms the dark ridges of the oak. You are still rationing your supplies, still being careful with each measure of flour and every scrap of salted meat, but the anxiety of the year without a summer has begun to soften into a patient, steady expectation. The endurance is no longer a struggle against the dark, it is awaiting for the light. Back inside, the cabin feels different in this new light. The shadows in the corners are less imposing, and the dust motes dancing in the sunbeams seem to move with a more spirited grace. You take down a book from the shelf, its leather cover cool and smooth, and you find that you can read the print without leaning toward the fire. The words seem clearer, the stories more vibrant, as if the returning light is breathing life back into the ink. You spend the afternoon in a state of tranquil productivity, mending a tear in a wool blanket and watching the way the frost on the window has begun to recede from the center of the panes. The intricate patterns are still there, but they are thinning, revealing more of the world outside. You see the jagged outline of the mountain peaks against the sky, their white caps brilliant and sharp, looking like the teeth of a giant. You feel a deep, quiet connection to the passage of time, a sense that you are moving through a threshold. The winter has not yet broken, there will be more storms, more nights of bitter frost, but the character of the cold has changed. It is no longer an eternal state, it is a season with a beginning and, now, the first faint hint of an end. As evening approaches, the twilight lingers just a few minutes longer than it did the day before. The violet hues of the snow are deeper, more vibrant, and the first stars appear with a soft, steady pulse rather than a cold, flickering glare. You prepare your tea, the steam rising in a gentle curl, and you sit by the window, watching the world fade into a peaceful, luminous blue. The silence is no longer an isolation, it is a sanctuary. You feel the weight of the months behind you, the hunger, the cold, the long nights of vigilance, and you realize they have left you with a profound, unshakable strength. You have learned the value of a single spark, the luxury of a warm quilt, and the deep, abiding comfort of a steady hearth. The mountain is still frozen, the snow is still deep, and the road to the valley below is still a distant dream, but as you bank the fire for the night, you do so with a light heart. You listen to the house settle into the cold, the wood sighing with a familiar, rhythmic ease, and you let yourself drift toward sleep, buoyed by the knowledge that the sun is climbing, the days are lengthening, and the great, white silence of the 19th century is slowly beginning to whisper of things to come. The morning light that now arrives at your window feels less like a cold, gray weight and more like a gentle, persistent invitation. It is 1816, and though the calendars in the distant towns might say it is the cusp of a new season, here in the high elevation of the mountains, the winter still holds its throne with a firm, icy hand. Yet, as you sit by the hearth this morning, the wood of your chair feels a little less brittle, and the air in the cabin carries a faint, almost imperceptible softening. It is not warmth, not yet, but rather a thinning of the hostility that has defined the last few months. You reach for your boots, and for the first time in weeks, the leather doesn't feel like frozen iron against your skin. The routine of the day begins with the same deliberate pace, but there is a new lightness in your step as you move toward the pantry. You find that the small bit of flour remaining at the bottom of the barrel is enough for a slightly thicker porridge today, a modest celebration of having seen the worst of the dark. The steam from the pot rises in a lazy, translucent spiral, and as you watch it, you find yourself breathing more deeply, the tightness that has lived in your chest since November beginning to unfurl, like a leaf waiting for the thaw. When you push open the door to venture out, the sound of the world has changed. The wind, which had spent the winter screaming through the eaves and scouring the valley with ice, has fallen into a respectful hush. In its place is a sound you had almost forgotten, the drip of water. It is a slow, rhythmic punctuation in the silence, tap, 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 coming from the southern edge of the roof where the sun's pale rays have finally found enough strength to tease a few drops from the heavy icicles. You stand on the porch, shielded by the overhanging logs, and watch as a single drop of water catches the light, glowing like a liquid diamond before falling into the deep, porous snow below. The drifts are still immense, towering over the windows and burying the world in a white, crystalline tomb, but the texture of the snow has shifted. It is no longer a dry, shifting powder. It is becoming heavy and granular, beginning to sag under its own tremendous weight. You walk to the edge of the porch and look toward the creek, hidden somewhere beneath 10 feet of frozen white, and you imagine the ice there is thinning from the bottom up, the water beginning to rediscover its voice in the dark, hidden places of the earth. This shift in the environment brings a shift in your internal landscape as well. The quiet endurance that has been your constant companion for months is starting to evolve into a soft, cautious hope. You spend the afternoon not just mending for survival, but preparing for the transition. You take down the heavy iron shears and begin to sharpen them, the rhythmic scritch-scratch of the stone providing a soothing soundtrack to the quiet. You think of the sheep that will eventually need shearing, and the garden that, despite the strange, cold summer of the year before, must be turned once more. The isolation, which once felt like a prison, now feels like a cocoon. You realize that you have been changed by this winter. The silence has taught you a level of patience that few in the bustling cities will ever understand. You have learned to find a universe of interest in the grain of a table or the way a candle flame dances in a draught. Your world is still small, still bounded by the snow and the timber, but it feels rich and full. You find yourself smiling at the sight of a small, dark patch of bark appearing on a nearby maple where the snow has slumped away, a tiny island of brown in a sea of white that feels like a monumental discovery. As the sun begins its descent, it lingers for a truly noticeable amount of time, stretching the afternoon into a long, golden hour that fills the cabin with a mellow, amber glow. You don't immediately light the candles, preferring instead to sit in the fading natural light, watching the way the shadows of the pine stretch across the valley floor. The fatigue of the long winter is still present in your limbs, a dull ache that speaks of months of hauling wood and melting snow, but it is a tired that feels honorable and nearing its rest. You prepare a simple tea of dried raspberry leaves, the warmth of the mug seeped into your palms, and you realize that you haven't felt the need to pull the heavy wool shawl around your shoulders for over an hour. The hearth fire is still necessary, still the beating heart of your home, but it no longer feels like a desperate barricade against an invading force. It is simply a friend, a steady presence that has seen you through the darkest nights of the 19th century and is now ready to guide you toward the light. The evening settles in with a profound, velvet peace. The stars are as bright as ever, but they no longer seem so distant and cold. They look like lanterns hanging in a familiar sky. You bank the fire for the night, but you do so with a light touch, knowing that the morning won't be quite so bitter as the ones that came before. You lie down in the rustling quiet of your bed, pulling the quilts up, but find that you only need 3 layers tonight instead of 5. The house is silent, yet it feels alive with the subtle, subterranean shifts of the mountain. You listen to the occasional thump of snow sliding off a high branch and the steady, comforting tick of the clock. You are close now. The great test is nearly over. You let your eyes close, the image of that single, falling drop of water etched into your mind, and you drift into a sleep that is deep, restorative, and filled with the scent of damp earth and the promise of a world about to wake. The silence of the mountain wraps around you, no longer a weight, but a soft, protective embrace that whispers of the coming sun and the gentle, inevitable end of the longest winter. The morning arrives not with the sharp, blue crack of frost, but with a soft, persistent gold that seems to soak into the very logs of the cabin. You wake to a sound that has been absent for months, a rhythmic, musical trickling that signifies the great, white silence is finally finding its voice. Water is running everywhere, carving tiny, silver veins through the shrinking drifts and dripping steadily from the eaves with a tempo that feels like a heart beginning to beat again after a long, cold sleep. You lie still for a moment, the weight of the quilts feeling unnecessarily heavy now, and you realize that the air in the room no longer bites at your nose. The deep, predatory chill has retreated, leaving behind a damp, earthy coolness that smells of waking moss and ancient, thawing stone. You rise with a lightness in your limbs that you haven't felt since the first snowfall, and as you move to the hearth, you find that the embers from the night before are still glowing bright and strong, as if they, too, know that their long vigil is nearing its natural end. You open the door, and this time, it doesn't groan against a wall of ice. The snow has slumped away from the threshold, revealing a narrow strip of dark, sodden earth, the first piece of the world you have seen in months. The sight of it, humble and muddy, brings a quiet warmth to your chest that no fire could provide. You step out onto the porch, breathing in air that is crisp but no longer brittle. Across the valley, the mountains are still draped in white, but the peaks have lost their jagged, hostile edge, softening under a sky that is a tender, pale robin's egg blue. You watch as a large patch of snow slides from a high pine branch, landing with a soft, heavy thump that echoes through the thinning woods. The forest is waking up, you can hear the distant, repetitive drum of a woodpecker and the chatter of squirrels emerging from their secret hollows. The isolation that once felt like a shroud has transformed into a profound, quiet wisdom. You have endured the harshest winter of the century, and in the silence, you have discovered the vast, unshakable depth of your own spirit. You spend the morning in a state of gentle recovery. You carry the heavy rugs outside, draping them over the railing to let the sun scour away the winter's dampness. You move through the cabin with the windows propped open just a crack, letting the fresh, moving air circulate through the rafters, carrying away the scent of wood smoke and old shadows. There is no rush to the work, it is a slow, meditative transition from survival back into life. You look at the nearly empty flour barrel and the small stack of remaining firewood, and instead of anxiety, you feel a deep sense of accomplishment. You have balanced the books with nature and come out whole. You realize that the 1800s will remember this year for its cold, but you will remember it for the way the light looked on the frost and the way a single cup of herbal tea could feel like a miracle. The endurance wasn't a loud, dramatic struggle, it was a series of small, quiet choices made in the dark, to keep the fire going, to share your grain with the animals, to stay patient when the world felt frozen forever. By the afternoon, the sun has found enough strength to warm the wood of the porch, and you sit there for a long time, simply letting the light rest on your face. You watch the meltwater create a small, rushing stream down the path you once struggled to shovel. The world is reclaiming itself, and you are reclaiming your place within it. There is a profound peace in knowing that the cycle has turned, that the darkness has had its say and now the light is returning to have its own. You think of your neighbors over the ridge, knowing they are likely standing on their own porches, squinting into the same sun, bound to you by a shared history of silence and cold. The mountain remains, steadfast and eternal, but it feels different now, less like a fortress and more like a home. You feel a soft, settling closure in your heart, a sense that the winter has taught you everything it needed to, and now it is stepping aside to let the spring begin its slow, green work. As the evening settles in, the twilight is long and filled with the promise of a gentle thaw. You go back inside and light a single candle, its flame steady and clear in the freshened air. You prepare a small meal, perhaps the last of the salted pork and a few dried apples, and you eat with a sense of quiet reverence for the simple fact of being. The fire in the hearth is small now, just a companionable glow to take the edge off the evening mist. You realize you are no longer listening for the wind or the crack of freezing timber, you are listening to the sound of the earth breathing, a slow, deep inhalation of life returning to the roots. You feel a deep, restorative tiredness, a sleepiness that comes not from the cold, but from the satisfaction of a journey completed. You blow out the candle, the scent of the beeswax lingering in the air, and you climb into bed. The world outside is still white in places, and the nights will still be cool, but the great winter has broken. You close your eyes, the rhythmic dripping of the eaves acting as a final, soothing lullaby, and you drift into a deep, peaceful sleep, safe in the knowledge that when you wake, the sun will be higher, the earth will be softer, and the long, silent winter will be nothing more than a memory held in the warmth of the coming spring.